Years ago when I used to go camping up in Algonquin Park in Ontario. Beautiful place. If you've never been there, you should go and see it one day. A friend of mine and his family had a cottage up there, so one summer I went up, spent some time with them. I believe it was a long weekend. And their parents were telling me a story of this lady that they used to see out in the woods who was floating. So that piqued my curiosity, obviously. And they shared the story with me, and now they've asked me to share it with you. This one's really good. So we drive up to his cottage, a little over 3 hours from my place. Very nice, very quiet there, far away from everyone. If you like to hike and walk and just take in nature, it's a beautiful spot there. So one night, his mom was saying that she heard some noise from outside the window. She was washing the dishes. There's a little window just above the sink. And she looked out there and she said she saw what looked like a couple of lights, like small orbs, just floating around just outside the window. But then when she was done with the dishes, she said she could hear someone crying out there, like a woman crying, the sound of a woman crying. And she went up to the window and looked around and didn't see anything, so she asked her husband to go out and take a look and see if anyone was kind of loitering around the property there. So her husband got a flashlight, he went outside and he walked around the cottage and went out a little further into where the woods were and looked around, didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, so he came back. And when he came back, his wife said she heard that crying sound again. She goes, I can hear that. So apparently no one else could hear that sound except for her. So she left it as that. They went to bed. And a few weekends later, she said same thing happened. She was washing dishes near the window, and she could hear the sound of a woman crying. But this time her husband actually said he heard something too. So she felt more relieved that, she wasn't losing her mind or anything, and feeling like she, was the only one hearing this and, people were going to judge her. But her husband heard it too. So she finished the dishes. He grabbed the flashlight, grabbed her hand. They both walked out the door. So they walk around that property, and they could hear a faint cry out in the woods. So they focused their attention on that area. So they started walking there, trying to follow the sound. And then all of a sudden, just off to the left, they see these two little orbs floating. They don't look like bugs or anything, or fireflies or whatnot. They're actually intelligent because they started to look towards them. It came towards them, they said. It stopped. And then it would slightly spin to the other orb. And they just stood there wondering, what the hell is that? So they looked around to make sure no one was playing a practical joke or anything, so they started calling out. And sure enough, they heard a woman crying just behind the trees. So they both ran in that direction and the orbs disappeared. Off they go into the woods there, and they're going towards what they think is a woman in distress. Maybe she's injured, maybe she's been attacked, something's happened. So they're very concerned. So when they get to the spot where they think the noise is coming from, it stops. So they're looking around and thinking, what's going on here? It just feels so weird. And they looked back at their place and they could see the two orbs now were up near their house, kind of just circling around. So they started calling out if anybody needed help or if they needed to call, the police or medical attention or anything. And then again they heard that faint cry. Then all of a sudden they turned around, and there, standing just off to the side, was a lady in a white dress, standing off the ground, literally 3 feet, and floating there. She floated there for a while. They just looked at her in amazement and thought, oh my God. The lady opened her mouth, but all you could hear was a faint, faint cry. And they kept asking her what was wrong. And then suddenly the two orbs came flying past them on each side, surrounded the lady, and tried to push the lady away from these two people. And the lady was opening her mouth like she was crying for help, and these two orbs were circling her and pushing her away. So the man and wife just ran back towards the house. They couldn't believe what they saw. They thought of calling 911, but they knew what they saw was not 3D. It was not human. It was an apparition of some sort. So they called a neighbor a few miles down the road and said, hey, have you ever seen this? And they explained to her what happened. And she said, for years, people have mentioned that once in a while they'll hear a woman crying out in the woods, and that they've seen a woman in white just levitating there. And they've also spoken about two lights or two orbs that were floating around. So the people around that area did know something. Apparently this went on many times for a long time. My friend's parents just had purchased that cottage a couple of years earlier. So they stayed inside and said, what are we going to do here? She walks back into the kitchen to make tea, and all of a sudden there's the lady in white standing just outside the window. Mouth open, like she's crying for help. These two orbs are just flying around her. The wife drops the mug on the floor, it breaks, the husband comes running in, and suddenly the apparition disappears. They both don't know what to do. They go to the front window of the family room, and they see this apparition just floating around the house. Floating and floating. The orbs are not letting this apparition get anywhere into the house, almost like as if they're protecting the people there. So finally the woman just floats and disappears back into the woods. The orbs then leave. So the last day they were there, packing and get ready to come back home, it was getting a bit late, and they decided they were going to spend the night there. So they went to sleep. And my friend said that in the middle of the night he was awoken all of a sudden, and he was totally awake. So he got up to go to the bathroom. He looks out the window, and there's the lady floating outside. He yells for his mom. She comes over, the father comes over, and there's the lady floating around. She moves from the family room outside, never inside the house, and she floated towards the kitchen window, and then floated away, and the family kept following her from inside, and she went near the back door, and they could see her through the window. She was literally a foot away, and the orbs started to come over, around her, circling around, buzzing around like bees. And she kept trying to come closer into the house, but the orbs kept pushing her back. So she walks around, and when she gets to the front door, there's the lady standing just outside. The orbs are circling her like crazy. She starts freaking out. She closes the curtain on the door, on the window there. In a panic, they decided they were not going to spend the night there. It must have been just after 2 a.m. So they flipped all the lights on in the house, got their boxes ready. The father opened the door. He looked around, got his flashlight. He could see the orbs literally just off to the side, and they were buzzing around, almost like protecting the family. They grabbed the boxes. He opened up the hatch. They started putting the boxes in. About half an hour later, they flipped the lights off, locked the door, and as they're getting into the car, they hear that faint cry again. Floating around the vehicle, she comes around the side. The wife starts screaming. My friend freaked out. The orbs started coming around the car. They locked the doors. He put it into drive, and he got out of there. They got home, they unpacked. No one said a word. As a matter of fact, no one said anything for many years.